Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are at the moment. It is a pleasure for No More to have you here today with us. And today we gather here at the crossroads of technology, innovation, and advocacy in the ongoing fight against gender-based violence. This summit serves a powerful reminder of technology's dual potential to empower and harm. Together, as a united force, we can harness this potential to create safer, more inclusive spaces for everyone. Today, we will engage in vital conversations, share groundbreaking insights, and collaborate on solutions that prioritize the safety, dignity, and rights of women and girls around the globe. Thank you for being part of this journey as we bridge the gap between technology and advocacy, ensuring the digital world becomes a vehicle for healing, justice, and equality. Today is a pleasure for me to introduce not only a colleague, but a friend, Rita Dasgupta, who is a passionate feminist who has dedicated over 23 years, I'm sure that many more than what she wants to declare, to the women's rights sector in India and in the UK, and is currently leading Swayam, a Kolkata-based feminist organization addressing gender inequality and violence against women and girls for the past 28 years. Amrita, good afternoon. Good morning from this side. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Pamela. It's such an honor and privilege to be here with all of you to be in this opening session on the No More Tech Summit. Pamela, that was a kind introduction and a dear friend and a co-journey, a co-person in this journey. Pamela is the Chief Executive Officer of the No More Foundation and has over 20 years of diverse experience. Before we dive into the session, I would like to introduce my fellow panelists who bring with them years of experience and will help us unpack the session planned for us today. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Atinuke Odukoya, and who is a public administrator with over 20 years of experience and the co-founder of Sequent based in Nigeria. Welcome to you. Sophie Mortimer is the manager of the UK Revenge Porn Helpline, supporting adults affected by intimate image abuse. Welcome, Sophie, to you. And Tarisai Buchuchu McMillan is an African feminist advocate who serves as the executive director of Mosaic Training Services and Healing Center in South Africa. So welcome to you as well. Before we go into the detailed session, there are some ground rules I need to share with all of you. The session is being filmed and we can watch it later on, possibly on the YouTube channel as well as the No More links. So look out for that. This session might be a trigger for some people hearing it. So please reach out to people for help and support, or you could write on the chat on the question answer for the global directory for information. And finally, we're encouraging you to ask questions in the Q&A box. The No More team or some of us will try and answer your questions. So as Pamela said, it's a very complex and a much needed discussion. The world around us is changing fast, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. These changes, all we can do is find ways to embrace it, cope with it, and find ways to deal with it. I think many of us in this panel here today and many of us hearing this conversation might have lived in an age where we didn't have mobile phones, we had telegrams and letters and landline phones. And suddenly, the first time a mobile phone came into our hands, it was a little box. And we thought that was the best thing that had happened in our lives. It was a little black little thing. And then we progressed. And today, in the last 20 years, our worlds have changed. And technology has taken over our lives in many ways that we can't even understand. Obviously, there are positive things. We are here connected from 4 different countries, and there are participants from all over the world. And this is only possible because of technology. But saying that, there is also a lot of downside. And here today in this conversation, all the panelists, we will be discussing, hearing, and understanding how technology has impacted our lives and the communities that we work in. We will hear about terms like cyberbullying, revenge porn, tech-based harassment and violence, morphing of images, and each speaker will help us unpack these complex issues, and they will also help us understand how to create awareness around us. With that, I'll start my first question with Tarisai. As the executive director of Mosaic, one of the largest women's organizations focusing on prevention and responding to domestic violence and intimate partner violence in South Africa, can you just share a little bit about what kind of a tech-based or tech-facilitated abuse that you're experiencing around youth for your work? And has the narrative around violence against women and girls changed because of this?
I think I'll start. Thank you so much, Amrita, and thank you everyone in No More for creating the space for all of us to connect in this way and be able to share not only the problem, but actually solution, focus on what can be done and how can we better solve this issue for and advance the rights of women and girls across the world. So very grateful to be here. I think the last, I want to start with the last to the first, it's become complex space for survivors because you have an added element, like you said, where it is easy, but it's also not easy, right? Because when you talked previously, before we used to just go physical violence, sexual violence, so something that's tangible, you can see, you can document, it's easy to prove. And as a lawyer myself, you always want evidence, and evidence is easy to prove. But in the tech space particularly, we have starting to see complex nuances to an already complex situation, especially in the domestic and intimate partner violence space, in the sense that relationship becomes more complex because how do you prove catcalling, stalking, when it's somebody you also, like, let's say you share children together and you have a co-parenting relationship, but you now also have this complexity of saying this person is actually using coercive control against me, and as a result, I am struggling or I'm suffering this, So I think that's something that we really need to grapple with. From a Mosaic perspective, and in South Africa, what we are seeing particularly is online harassment and cyber stalking, and particularly perpetrators or people who use violence using the digital space to monitor and intimidate and control survivors. And again, I've already used one of the most complex for us because we work in the domestic and intimate partner violence space. So you see that complexity of this is somebody you love, this is someone you co-parent with mostly, or someone you've been with years, there's a whole family structure around you, and you're trying to prove that actually they're not hitting me, I do not have physical scars, but they're using technology to do this. And sometimes it's really hard. Someone can read your message and be like, but you are just, it's not like that. They didn't mean it that way. So that's one of the big things that I think we need to look at it. Another thing, again, our technology tells where you are all the time. So for instance, our GPS location services is a big issue. We run 2 shelters, a stage 1 and a stage 2 shelter. One of the big hard lessons when we started was knowing that abusers can locate survivors. We run a program where we are survivor-centered, trauma-informed. So you do not want to cut off survivors from everybody, but it becomes such a complex issue when the person can use technology to locate where they are and to expose the shelter, not only to the actual survivor who's experiencing harm from them, but everybody else in the household, in the shared household, becomes exposed to that danger. That's a big deal. How do you balance? So that complexity of balancing survivor rights to staying true to the safety nature of what you're trying to provide of your service becomes complex. You know what I mean? So how do you say survivor-centered, trauma-informed in that space? I think that's the big thing. Again, I mean, I'm talking about domestic and intimate partner violence as if like there's already consent, but there's non-consensual contact where somebody just contacts you and harasses you when you do not want that contact anymore. They use social media, people, you create fake profiles. And we've seen also now with the relaxing of the rules with Meta and all of that, like, you get what I mean? Like, we are going to see more and more abuse, tech-facilitated abuse coming along because we can, how do you protect yourself against the relaxing of digital privacy protections? So that sort of thing, or hate speech being allowed in the internet space, and what we consider coercive control that amounts to hateful speech and all of that now being loose and being acceptable. So those type of things exposes survivors or victims even to more danger that we need to be looking at. Of course, the big thing that can be used against survivors that I just want to highlight, in the interest of time, is particular around non-consensual distribution of intimate, what you share in the intimate space, thinking you love each other, and somebody then weaponizes that against you is the most horrific thing that I think one can experience, because you really believe you are in love, you really are in love with this person, and you share some of your most intimate parts of who you are, and you wake up just because you have an argument or you now want to break up with them or whatever the situation is, you wake up at the internet, literally, depending on what hashtag they use, you could be not only in your own community, in your own country, but across the globe, people sharing your pictures and all of that. So I think that exposure is really is a vice against women. And because of the shame culture against women, the gender norms that are against women, particularly in the social norms, women then shy away from just standing up. We have seen recent examples here in South Africa where prominent women have been exposed in this way, but men are exposed and they just show up. We know MPs here who just are still MPs, but women then they're silenced by that. They do stop their work. They are not able to show themselves in public as a result. So those are some of the things that we experience. Yeah.
I think that was a lot of diversity in your conversation. If we can move to Atinuke, there might be similarities in Nigeria, but if there's anything else in terms of diversity that we can help understand this complex issue, do share with us. And obviously, there are nuances, similarities, as well as differences in your part of the world, if you could share with us.
It's exciting to be here. I take off from where Teresa had left, and particularly talking about sharing of pictures. That's something that seems to be common globally, but I want us to look at it from the angle of young girls, youth, sometimes in what I call or term their thoughtlessness, sharing of pictures with friends, sharing of videos. Of course, at that adolescent age, also the issue around intimate partner violence. Interestingly, it's amazing how much more intimate partner violence is going on amongst adolescents these days. And because of their own increased access to technology, particularly mobile phones, and then the different apps from Snapchat to TikTok, different things that they have access to, a lot of sharing of videos, a lot of sharing of pictures, and then non-consensual sharing amongst friends being used to blackmail, to gaslight, to get a lot of young girls into some kinds of trouble. I would also like to talk about issues around social norms and how these things are handled in our different spaces. So Teresa mentioned the issue of shame, stigmatization, the expectation of women and girls not to speak up or speak out, the being shamed for having sent a picture, whether nude or just compromising, to someone that you termed or you thought was a very good friend or an intimate partner. A lot of gaslighting going on. I've had situations and cases of young girls who didn't share their pictures actually, but other friends shared their pictures with people that were then blackmailing them with those pictures. And, they didn't have the guts, the courage to speak up and speak out to their parents or to the trusted adults around them. And so it started to have an impact on suicide and suicide ideation, because more people, young people, old people, are beginning to take on the shame, the inability to speak up, particularly because how do you defend your pictures or your videos out there in the space, And so some are thinking and along the lines of, rather than face this shame, let me just end it, So those are some of the things that are coming up even along the climb, not just in Nigeria. I believe that there's so much similarities across the globe because, like we say, the world is now a village. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If we can move across to Sophie, if you can share what's happening in the UK and what kind of a calls do you take on the helpline?
Absolutely. And again, thank you very much for having me here. It's great to be at this event. And I do think that discussions like this are so important to bring together people from different parts of the world to understand their experiences of particularly of my area of intimate image abuse, but of course more broadly. The Revenge Porn Helpline in the UK supports adults who've been affected by the sharing of intimate images without consent. And I think that the UK has quite a mature response now. The helpline was founded 10 years ago, which is when we first got legislation around this. So we do have quite a lot of experience, but actually what we know is that the goalposts keep moving. This form of abuse keeps changing. And there's a thing in the UK called whack-a-mole. When it comes down one place, it comes up two other places, and you're constantly batting it away. And I think there are enormous impacts for people who've had images shared in this way. Shame still is something that we see across the UK. Women are disproportionately affected by this form of abuse because in the UK we have a sexual double standard where the behaviour of men is seen very differently from the behaviour of women. Last year, when of all the images that we report, because one of the things that we do is report people's online images for removal, 98.4% of what we reported was of women. It's a huge disproportion in the number of images, how far that they spread, how they are used, shared, downloaded, traded, and it's something that hangs over somebody when that threat is there, when those images are shared. It's something that somebody has to live with 24 hours of every single day. There is no escape from it. As we've said, we have these incredibly powerful devices in our hands. Everyone has one, and your life can be ruined in a moment, when those images are shared amongst family, friends, your community, workplaces. It absolutely shatters every part of somebody's life. Their emotional and psychological well-being, sometimes their physical safety, implications for their workplace and careers. It touches every part of somebody's life, and I think it is so hard to move on from, because it is constantly going to be there, that fear that those images will come back, because the nature of the internet is that they may well. So I think that there are huge implications. And survivors are often told to come off platforms. That's always the solution. We'll come off Facebook, come off Instagram, just don't use it, don't use your phone, or we'll take your phone to investigate. And that's disempowering for women. That's telling them to shrink their lives, do less, don't go out. And it's like those snakes that they just carry and they contract and they contract, and then you have no room to breathe. And I think that is it's another response that women are so often told: adjust your behavior, do less, don't be so noticeable. And this is where we have women leaving public roles of authority that they are entitled to and qualified for, because they are living with these fears and the use of shame against them. And I also think that one of the reasons why I love conversations like this one is that we can start to talk about some of the regional differences, what we call an intimate image. So in the UK, we have legislation and we have defined what constitutes an intimate image, but it's quite a narrow definition, really, in terms of nudity or sexual activity. But for many people, particularly women around the world, there are different definitions of intimacy, and we need to have more sophisticated responses to understand how we can respond to that. And it's a very live conversation in the UK. We have women in the UK coming and saying, well, I'm sitting in this photograph of me sitting with somebody I shouldn't be with, or I have bare arms, I'm not wearing a headscarf. This could affect every part of my life. I could be at risk of honor-based violence. So I think it's so important that we understand what constitutes intimacy, and that those impacts will be just as enormous for those people as for a sexual image for somebody somewhere else. So it's a complex conversation, but discussions like this are a really huge step forward in improving our understanding, which will shape our responses.
Thank you so much. I think it's very useful and empowering to hear what's happening around the globe, because the conversation in India is similar, with a large population where everybody now has access to mobile phones. And I believe that India is one of the highest pornographic users in the world. And we don't generally talk about sex and have a lot of sex education going around. Somewhere there is a belief that what we are seeing online is real. And that has actually changed the narrative of sexual violence, both in an intimate relationship and stranger violence, or stranger rape, or stranger kind of assault. And I think that's really scary, like we are talking about, is really changing the narrative globally and in different countries. And I think these conversations are important for us to look at the common threads and find ways that we can combat it. If I can talk to all of you about your experience of how you're engaging with this issue and responding to this issue in your own spaces, and the different strategies you're using to raise awareness around the issue. So if I can start with Atinuke, please, if you could talk about the strategies your organization is using or tools you're using to raise awareness.
So one of the core things that we do in the organization is actually around creating awareness on issues of sexual gender-based violence, inclusive of tech-related violence. We engage with students in some of the schools around our area, raising awareness on issues around GBV, including the online, the digital, the tech space or tech-related cases. And sometimes we have those cases come up. Selwyn does not provide services, but we do have a strong referral connect where we refer cases. One of the core things that we also do is to train community people as what we call psychosocial first aiders. One of the reason behind that is simple. In Nigeria, we have very limited numbers of psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists compared to the population of the country and the areas where these specialists or professionals are located. So just like the Red Cross or the first aider, the psychosocial first aider has been trained to understand issues around gender-based violence, understand survivor-centered human rights approach, understand what are the different kinds of cases or issues or experiences that survivors or victims can have, and when they come to them. So we have a lot of training in terms of talk therapy, and where that is not enough, right, then we refer to other professionals that we work with. One of the core things that we do within the talk therapy is also, there's a lot of shaming and cancel culture at this time. So a number of people are too ashamed or feel too stigmatized to even speak up or speak out. So one of the things that we're doing a lot is to encourage people to speak up, to speak out, to not condemn themselves, to know that there is a safe space where when you raise your issues remain there. It's not out there in the public space. So strongly is in terms of awareness creation, in terms of letting people know, what does it even mean? What are the things that look that way? So sometimes because of shaming and the way things are seen within our culture, people tend to, pile the blame on the feminists, or to pile the blame on females, women, girls, young girls, and condemn them for things that on the other way should be piled on the perpetrator. So what we try to do is also to engage with the community as a whole to begin to see how it's not on the survivor, but on the perpetrator. Yeah, over.
Thank you so much. Sophie, do you want to take this? What kind of I know the calls come in, but is there any work around prevention and awareness that the helpline is doing in UK?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. When we've tried to look and do some modeling about how big we think this issue is, we suspect, and I often talk about it as an iceberg, that we only see the top of, and we just don't know how big it is. And looking at some of the modeling, some of the research that's been done globally, we think it's a huge, huge problem. And I've seen research where actually a large proportion of people who've had images shared, they don't report it to anyone. They don't report to the police. They don't report to a helpline like us. And that's just in the UK, which is fortunate to have a service that can help. So I think awareness raising is hugely important. I think we're still 10 years in, it still feels like relatively early days for people understanding that this is abuse, that this is in fact against the law, and that there is help available. So we do quite a lot. We do a lot of campaigns. So at the moment, we're running a 10-year anniversary campaign to mark 10 years of the helpline and 10 years of legislation. And it's giving us an opportunity to talk about how far we've come, but also what there is still to do because of those changes in technology and how adept abusers are at shifting their techniques. They're very motivated, so they're always going to be changing, and we're always going to be playing an element of catch up to try and respond. So campaigns like that are really important. We talk to the media a lot. We try and engage them about particular issues. So we're always talking to government about how we think the law needs to, and policy need to change to give better responses for victims and more support and more rights. And that works quite well. The current government is quite open to those conversations. They have a really ambitious target currently to halve violence against women and girls in over 10 years. Now, we all know what a big ambition that is. But you know, I'm here to help. I'm here to do something if they will give us the resources to tackle that. But that's getting a lot of narrative in the media, and I think it's getting across all of our social media, print media, just to get those messages out there. Yes, this is abuse. Yes, you do not have to tolerate it. We have drawn that line in the sand that says this behavior is illegal, and there is help. The government is funding help to get those images removed and to try and reduce and stop the sharing of those images. So yeah, that's a huge thing. Working with police is another thing to try and improve their responses, because they don't get the training, they haven't got the resources, and they don't. I think there's definitely a gap with the police about them appreciating that what happens online is just as significant for somebody as what is happening offline, that the two are the same, that I think our police in the UK still think, well, you know, unless you had something stolen or damaged or you were harmed physically, then it's not a crime. And that's something that we're really having to push back on. So trying very hard to engage with the police. So there is much work to do, but I always have to be optimistic that there is hope, and that there are opportunities. And again, conversations like this, sharing ideas, so valuable.
Smiling at all the commonalities. Tarisa, can you also share what's happening at your end in terms of prevention work and awareness work around this issue?
I think the biggest thing for South Africa in recent years, in 2022, we had the 3 GBV laws. I mean, our law, first of all, I must just put it out there, South Africa is known, we have the best laws ever. You know, we do, but implementation is always slow, and that's the big issue. So we found yet another way to deepen the law in 2022. And that came, I think, particularly around technology facilitated GBV, was now recognized like in a deeper way, like it's now in the definitions of the law, which then is added protections, particularly around courts recognizing when you come, you do not necessarily have to just show physical scars, or have to now try to plug in that, you know, you're experiencing physical violence and all of that, you know, the traditional forms of definitions. I think that's the big thing that we've won. I think there's a big also recognitions, particularly around that coercive control happens in the digital space. And because of that, that awareness coming through not only just in the law, it's also transcending, particularly in our education and awareness work that we do directly, but even our partners, just from a united front as a civil society, recognizing that we need to talk about it more and that it's now part of our education materials and that we're engaging with it. I think just with Atinuke, when you mentioned young people, particularly when we talk about consent, we're not just talking about giving consent, but also like obtaining consent and understanding the safety between each other and how to not have harmful relationships. And you know, what you think is innocent as a young person, what you think we are just doing for fun, you know what I mean, can end up escalating to something because it is their world. Their world is digital. It's not like, you know, you and I might, even if I'm a millennial, I mean, I'm at the top end of the millennial, not at the bottom, you know, not closer to Gen Z. And so you realize, you know, I'm a millennial who was exposed to faxes and, you know, and emails came later in my life. So you're not thinking in the digital space, whereas with younger people, the Gen Z, the Gen Alpha, they literally are born and the phone is in their hand. And so, you know, like, I mean, research is showing us these young people even less, they will have less and less physical relationships as more they will have digital relationships. And because the digital space is so fast and our messages move, we have to invest, and we are investing in educating them on how to be safe online, what it means how to express love online with that, and we have to include that. We can't just think that it's about writing letters to each other anymore. So those are things that we are including. But I think like part of prevention for us, response work is prevention. We have to strengthen the laws and not only from that the domestic violence or the sexual harassment or the harassment laws include and recognize digital tech facilitated abuse, but that the magistrate, when I come and report and when I'm applying for a protection order, they understand what I'm talking about. And so what Mosaic has done is that we've got what we call a strengthening actors for effective preventive response program. It's called SAFE, and it's place-based, and we look at that collaborative platforming of ensuring that we have a shared goal of like we want to be survivor-centered, trauma-informed, whether you are the police officer, whether you are the magistrate, whether you are the social worker, but we form an ecosystem, and we must have a shared understanding of what this means. And when a survivor presents themselves to us, how do we respond? We recognize that as feminists, you know, branded as feminists, I can move, I can talk this language, but if my police officer who's my colleague actually cannot, while they're in the system, they're not exposed to this training, they're not exposed to this. So how part of the SAFE platform is to ensure that we're exposing them to some of the things we know so that they can use the tools as a duty bearer to respond appropriately when a survivor presents themselves to report it as a crime, and that they do not send the survivor and say, well, that's not a crime. We point them to the act. We help them to understand that this is the act, and this is something that we are doing, particularly as colleagues, so that we're not just talking to each other from an advocacy perspective where we're fighting, but we have a critical friendship where we help them understand, and then they're able to implement the laws better.
Very impressive. I think I will ask Pamela to comment on this because I do know that No More has done a lot of work on raising awareness and sensitization, not just in the UK, but different parts of the world. So if you could share some of the strategies and prevention tools used by your team, please.
Yes, I think that we have a bit of a bifocal approach. By one side, we have the general public and survivors. And so a lot of the work that No More does, because we're focused on prevention, is, of course, campaigns, information, resources for survivors. And that's, you know, a big part of the construct. The other thing that we do is that we have a platform called Share Your Story. Now, this is really important because people go in, share their story. There is support in the background, but you can also search the type of abuse that you have suffered and try to find other people. So you don't have to read everybody's whole story, right? I can just write you know, a term like, you know, verbal abuse or shouting or, you know, whatever that is, which could be tech, revenge porn, pictures, etc. And so that facilitates, because I guess that one of the problems here and I'm sure you all will testify it, is that people don't want to share. They feel that maybe it's only happened to them, and especially things like image-based abuse. People then will ask the question that there's some judgment behind it, right? Why did you do that? You know, I've elevated myself in the position like I would never do that, but why have you done that? Why did you share a picture? So it's important for people to find somebody else, right, that has done it, and understand that they're not alone in that. And of course, we have the global directory that shares resources. And from this kind of second aspect is the work that we do with companies, grassroots organizations, and governments, which be talking about some of these topics and enabling conversations like today, of course, a tech summit being one of those deliverables.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I think there was a lot of things I could resonate with, especially there could be laws, but the implementation is a challenge. There could be laws, but understanding is a challenge, especially around tech-based violence. When we go to the cyber cell here, they haven't had the proper training, and they all come from a very traditional patriarchal mindset. For them to go through these images and kind of make sense of it without being judgmental is a very hard act to follow. And I think some of the things we do at SWAYAM is, raising awareness, similar trainings, capacity buildings. But I think at this current moment, because I think all of you seem to be at a different space than us here, we are talking about it, but I think we're also talking about raising awareness internally within the organization and building our capacities at a grassroots level with the community team members in different villages, because they need to understand what's hitting them. And also, phones have reached every part of the country. Yet, education might not have reached where phones have reached. So you're getting online and having conversation with some random man out there, and you're so excited because, you've got attention and love, and you think everything is awful in your life. And this man, or this supposed man online, will be the answer to all your misery in your life. And you go, and there's been cases of women being murdered, assaulted, or lost, or they come back, or they can't come back. And I think one of the common trends I'm hearing today across the countries is shame and stigma. And I think feminists for generations have been talking about breaking shame and stigma in all forms of violence. Yet today, after all these years, we are back to another form of violence, but it's very interlinked with shame and stigma and lack of recognition. So I think these are the commonalities that we are facing. And I think Tarisa mentioned a word which I would like to comment a bit on, is consent. I think understanding consent is crucial, and I think having conversations about boundaries. So, teaching everybody, people of all genders, what my boundary is and how I need to maintain mine, and how not to cross somebody else's boundary, and talking about consent. These are conversations, unfortunately, we have to have a lot more, because maybe, as all of you are saying, we are online a lot more. Maybe we are losing social skills. Maybe we used to read body language and facial expressions more. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. We need to have conscious conversations about managing my own safety and boundary, physical boundary, and consenting and learning how to say no. And learning how to say no is a common conversation that has been had for generations, but now it's got a different twist to it. So with that, I want to come back to Sophie and ask you about these terms that we often use and what these terms actually mean. So synthetic imagery, non-consensual image sharing, morphing, revenge porn. I mean, for the audience who's listening and out there, if you could explain these terms a bit more to us, please.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really important conversation to be having, because there are so many terms that are used in different contexts, and sometimes interchangeably and sometimes not. So I think trying to gain some clarity would be fantastic. I think it might take a while, but I will certainly try. So there is a lot of confusion. And it's really important that we have these global conversations to try and find some similar understandings of what these terms mean, because that can only help. So non-consensual image sharing is the sharing of a private nude or sexual photo or video of someone without their consent. And this can be done by posting it on social media or on an adult site, or via a private or group message or email. In the UK, it actually also includes hard copy pictures, or showing somebody else on a phone, so literally putting the phone in front of someone. And it's been a criminal offence to do this in the UK since 2015. And we've been here supporting people since then for that 10 years. What is often referred to as deepfake, we refer to as synthetic sexual imagery. And that is images of a nude or sexual nature, like those just referred to, but ones that have been created using AI generative technologies. The media really commonly talks about these as deepfakes, but we're trying to move away from this term because it actually originates from a Reddit forum and was coined by somebody who was creating this sort of content, and it's not a very survivor-focused term. So I think it's an uphill battle, but we are trying to move away from it. Similarly, the phrase revenge pornography, it's slightly tricky because that is the name of our helpline, and I'm the first to stand here and say that it is quite a problematic term. It's very widely used by the media still in the UK and globally to refer to the sharing of intimate images without consent. It's based on the assumption that in most cases images have been shared within what was a personal relationship that may have broken down, and that one party has shared them in a desire for some form of retribution, or to get their own back, or out of anger or upset. But it implies that use the word revenge. It implies that somebody at some level deserves what has happened to them, which is quite clearly not the case. And also, these images are not pornography. Pornography is commercial and consensual and legal, and it is intended to be viewed and consumed. And that is not what these images are. And it's very, very distressing for somebody to see images that they've created in a trusting environment with someone that they cared about and who they thought cared about them, to see those images side by side with a commercial pornography on an adult site, because that feels degrading of their own experience. So we do understand better some of the forms of intimate image abuse, and we know that stereotype that is called revenge pornography is only part of the story. And while we do see that images are shared after the breakdown of a relationship, it often comes as part of a pattern of abuse. It's not coming, it's not out of the blue, it's not happening in isolation. So we see images being shared of people, but mostly of women. They're being threatened with the sharing of images as part of a pattern of coercive control. We also see men experiencing financially motivated sexual extortion, often called sextortion. And we see images of women that are being shared and collected and traded, which is a thing that we call collector culture, because it's often the secondary sharing, and it's not designed to cause direct harm to the woman involved. She's often almost a byproduct of a practice of a male-to-male sharing of this form of content. So there are lots of different behaviours and different terminology, and coming to some consensus would be really beneficial, I think, for us all, because it would improve understanding. And once we have improved our understanding, then perhaps we can move forward towards some better solutions.
Thank you, Sophia. I think it's important for us to understand the nuances and differences. It's very subtle, and I'm assuming that there might be different terminologies used in different parts of the world. The abuse would be the same. The terms that we use to refer to it might vary, but I think maybe a guidebook going forward, the way things are turning, would be helpful for all of us. With that, I want to move on to Atinuke and ask you how tech-based violence impacts women with disabilities, because there is always this misconception that women with disabilities, the intersection between gender-based violence and women with disability, and then you add on a tech-based violence angle to that. How is the impact, and what is the experience that you're seeing through your work, please?
So I like the fact that you started. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it echoes a bit sometimes.
Yeah. All right. So we have some misconceptions actually around issues of women with disabilities with any form of gender-based violence at all, and then inclusive of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. The number one thing is the fact that there is limited data or information or research as to how technology-facilitated gender-based violence affects women with disabilities. That said, they face pretty much the same things that women generally face, but with a twist to it. Now, because of the misconceptions that we usually have around women with disabilities, so for instance, people feel like women with disabilities are not desirable, may not be on, let's take for instance, dating apps. When Teresa was speaking, she talked about the Gen Z and the Generation Alpha. And as such, women with disabilities, even within those generations, are faced with having the phones, the apps, all of the technology features in their hands, even as they come in. Of course, we know that disability is not homogeneous. And as such, there are different clusters within the disability group. And so these different clusters also tend to face the violence with a slightly different approach to it. So I'll talk about, for instance, intellectual disabilities, which is usually within a wide range from autism to dyslexia to cerebral palsy to Down syndrome and the whole gamut there. My point just is that with intellectual disabilities, they're more simple in their minds. It's much easier for them to be taken advantage of, right? So usually the assumption is that they are sheltered and they are protected because they're within a space and they have carers that guide them through whatever. One is that it has been established that more often than not, abuse is also by carers and trusted people. Now they get on the social media space, on the tech space with the simplicity of just wanting to be a part of. Now, they also have desires just like any of us. So that you're a woman with disability does not mean that you do not have hormones and that your hormones are not raging. It doesn't mean that you don't have desires to have an intimate partner relationship. It doesn't mean that your sexuality is not intact. But what then happens to them is, and I'll give an example, a clear example of a case that is close to me, of a young woman with some minor intellectual disability of sorts, but also has desires to be a part of all the things that their friends are doing. So they're on the phone, using the phones to maybe buy stuff on different sales or marketing apps, but then stumbles on dating apps. Now, for them, because they don't even have as much information as you would assume that a general youth would have, they stumble into these spaces very vulnerable, very green. They have no idea. So they get into conversations with some random person online that they cannot verify, that they do not know their age and all of that. Sometimes they assume that the person is female, but this is an imposter that is taking advantage of their simplicity. So this is one form of violence that they face a lot. A number have gotten into situations where then from being trolled online, from being groomed online, that's the word, from being groomed online, are lured into spaces where they get physically, sexually violated, right? So that's one of the core areas where gender-based violence affects women with disability differently. The other area is the fact that when we talk about inclusiveness, oftentimes accessibility for many people is looking at the deaf with the sign language, is looking at texts and some accessibility online and all of that. But again, the group that falls within the physical disability space, the group that falls within what we call albinism in our space, all of those groups are, there's nothing technically, as it were, wrong with their understanding and their engaging of technology, right? So in those spaces, they then also get caught up in the general use of tech. And sometimes they get caught up in, unfortunately, sharing also nudes, sharing videos, sharing inappropriate pictures and all of that. And that happens because already they have a low self-esteem. they have a low sense of worth for a lot of women with disabilities, particularly in communities and areas where they are not appreciated, where they are seen as second-class citizens. So because of that, they get into a space where they require validation, and that validation from anyone at all, right? So once they get online and someone is sounding nice and sounding sweet, it becomes an issue. And, you know, they sometimes willingly just play into those hands. And by the time it becomes abusive, like every other woman, the issue of shame and stigma then kicks in. And more for them because they're already struggling with low self-esteem, right? So they're unable to speak up, to speak out. They do not even know where to speak to. I'm unsure of other areas, but I know that in Nigeria, we're just beginning to have those conversations around integrating services and response to women with disabilities within the general gender-based violence response across the country, because a lot of organizations and institutions also do not have the capacity to respond to women and girls with disabilities in that wise. So there's that challenge of where to report to, whom to speak with, what to do, how to go about it, right? So one of the things that we are trying to do in the past couple of months, established what we call the technical action and sustainability plan with different states where we're working to ensure that different service providers across board, whether it's shelter, whether it's sexual assault referral centers, whether it's counseling services, whether it is law enforcement, judiciary, begin to mainstream, begin to integrate response to women and girls with disabilities in the service that they are providing. Of course, the awareness levels are just coming up. People are just trying to engage in that wise, but that makes it a little more difficult for women with disabilities, particularly as relates to technology facilitated gender-based violence.
Thank you so much. I mean, taking from this, if I can ask Pamela, what are the different kind of trends or uniquenesses that we see with older women who face tech-based violence? There is a different layer of stigma around women who are supposedly older, and suddenly even 40 seems older for many people. So I think, what is your experience about older women experiencing violence and tech-based violence?
I think older women have it very difficult just in the gender-based violence sense. So even let's take a step, back, just a lack of acknowledgement sometimes that, older women can be victims of domestic or sexual violence. I think it's very important. So you already start fighting a little bit of a stigma. And I think it was Sarasai that made this kind of distinction, this generational distinction between what we already can qualify as older millennials, which would be your 40 plus, before, who were, everybody from there above is people who were able to see, let's say, the world in a different way, right? And this combination of an analog and a digital world. So it could be that they already kind of start approaching relationships or a way of working that is different from what you get right now from, Generation Z. So I think that understanding then that they as a group might be looking at these issues a little bit differently is one thing. But then it's this kind of divide also where it feels like, oh, they're not in dating apps. Of course they are. Right? They might not share an image. Of course they share images. We can ask, Sophie, about this, right? This is not only happening to youngsters. And then there's another myth that comes on top of it. They're completely ill-equipped to do this. No, many of them, know how to use the technology. They're falling because, also young people fall into this, right? So, however, the stigma that goes with that could be bigger, right? I'm a 50-year-old who is has sent pictures to somebody, like, I that should be an 18-year-old doing that, right? Or I might be even more embarrassed about my pictures. I send the picture to a person that I really, really trusted. So the stigma could be, bigger, but you also have this, what Atinuke kind of addressed, which is this moment in your life where you might already start not feeling, very confident, in different places, women, in their 40s, 50s, 60s are trying to maybe adapt. Maybe they're in a second relationship. Maybe they are trying to kind of, move something forward, and they're going through all of these avenues and being a bit more vulnerable because they're starting again, because, they might have a sensation that they failed in their first relationship, and then falling prey to kind of sweet ears, sweet talk. And we have a lot of that when it comes to romance scams, which we're dedicating one session today, for example, in the tech conference, right? And all of the bits that develop there. So there's a host of issues, but I think acknowledging that older women suffer tech abuse, and it's not only romance scams that they fall prey to, but to the whole host of issues that also happen to young people is really, really important, so they get the appropriate support that they need.
Absolutely. I think they are also a target group we need to address and talk about separately. And there are so many intersections of individuals facing violence. And one of you, I can't remember who, talked about there is no one definition of somebody experiencing violence. So I think, somewhere we talk about tech equal to younger people often, and we miss out a larger group of individuals who could be 30 plus, is also older for some people, and the assumption that people who are 60s and 70s don't have desires. And I think one of you talked about it with Atinuke talked about women with disability. It's the same thing with elder women or women who are older, that they might also want attention and love, and often get into situations they don't know how to come out of. They are not as tech savvy as the younger generations, and the stigma is a lot more. And I think the stigma comes from all of us who think, how can my mother be dating, or how can my mother be talking to a random boy, or my grandmother, as the matter may be. That's even more shocking. And I think somewhere we need to also stop this high horse judgment call that all of us do in our own lives as well, with the women in our lives. And I think we can start there. I think I would like to now slowly wrap up and go to Tarisai and talk about, I think it's very clear that there is a lot of work to be done. But if we talk about, it's a broader question, whose responsibility is it to do this work? Each of us have talked about different elements. What I've heard from all of you, we're talking a lot of organizational responsibility, institutional responsibility. Is there a responsibility within homes, families, educational institutions, or any other space you want to talk about and share some of the strategies we can use?
I think the buzzword that we use is it's a whole society approach. It cannot be individual. And because what we are talking about, this complex type of violence, is in spaces we're actually not privy to. And we know that domestic and intimate partner violence, or any type of violence that particularly is linked to homes and relationships, is not open to us. We are let in. Someone has to let into their story in order for us to help. Someone has to report. So I think the big thing for us in all our education, particularly, like, I think the first thing for me is focusing on prevention. And it starts from, from ECD, early childhood development, right up to old age homes, if you can, wherever private spaces, wherever people are gathering, and where there's an opportunity for conversation, we have to be open about it. It can't be only provided in workshop settings, formal settings, and all of that, reliant on organizations. We have to make it a daily conversation. So that means it's our media. How media structures and reports is quite important. How we are using social media is important. So the infographics, the way we are developing content is important because it is consumed, right? So how people consume and receive information is important. So how we develop the content is important. So for instance, we've talked about different intersectional lenses here. So how are we targeting young people? Are we targeting persons with disabilities? all those intersectional lenses needs to be taken into account. The shame, so we are trying to, what we need to be confronting is these social norms, these ingrained social norms about body shaming, things like that. I quite enjoyed, Sophie, when you were talking about the definitions, like it was a learning moment, because there's some definitions we use, that I'm like, oh, wow, like I've never looked at, like thought of revenge porn, even as a lawyer, like, oh, wow, this is actually a legal definition that you know what I mean, that you are now putting across. So like I learned something today. And I think that must influence when we learn, we have to unlearn and repackage that content, because we are taking it out into spaces. But for me, I always like to not only talk about to the formalized organizations here, but it's how we educate for the home. Because at that party, where, when young people are together in that small spaces where you are not, because all we are going to see is later on social media when it's trending and we are responding to something that's already out there. So we have to make sure that prevention is key. When we are talking about older women, like, like it's almost like when you hit 40, you become desireless, dreamless, like you have no hormones flowing in your body, and so you do not, that sort of thing. And how, like, for instance, we've had recent cases in South Africa where older women who are politicians or who are like prominent have been in love or in relationships with younger men, and who are now using whatever they did in private to extort money or resources from them, and it becomes a public war. But what happens is that they're so shamed, and the comments and body shaming, and like, how could that granny do that? Oh my goodness, the language. And what does she do? She retreats, right? She retreats, and she's so shamed that she cannot hold her office anymore, because it seems like almost her dignity is stripped away. How do you change that culture? Because when a man who's an older man goes through that, yeah, it can, some people even like makes it like he's conquered something. He managed to do something that he's defied nature. You get what I mean? So I think there's a lot of education and social like mindset, like that relearning, unlearning that we need to go through to do that. Of course, there are laws and things like that, and we've talked of the obvious. I'm not gonna, but I think it's really around, we can't make it like it's institutional education, but we have to make sure, like, are we going to make sure that that education trickles from early childhood right up to, to older persons, so that we really transform the ideas. And also we also remove, because all of this is about power and control. What we're trying to do is dismantle power and control. You are trying to say you will not have power just because you put this online, and to shame me and to silence me and to get something out of me. And when we make it something that's not, so shocking, or something that is used to silence somebody or to shame them into silence or into oblivion, then we remove that power and control, and then people will not be able to use this as a form of violence.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I have the hard task of being a little more tight with time now that we are kind of, so Sophie, if you could go next and just in a minute talk about what are the ways we can engage beside the state or the institutions, other spaces, the holistic approach, but what are the unique spaces or individuals that we can reach out to?
I think for us, one of the areas that we're building is tech responses to intimate image abuse and the sharing of people's intimate images without their consent, in a way that will empower individuals to take some control back of in a position where they feel that they have, somebody else has got the power and somebody else has the control. We're going to try and give it back to them. And we have developed a platform called stopncii.org, which allows people to create digital hashes of their own images to stop them being shared and reshared on our partner platforms. But the key thing here is that the person doesn't have to share their image with us or anyone else. It remains on their own device. They create this digital hash, and the hash is then sent. It can't be reverse engineered back into the image. It's secure. They send it to us. We then send it out to our partner platforms, who are, currently Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, and many of the big platforms, with more coming. And I think it's tools like those that present an opportunity for victims and survivors to take back some power and to feel reassured that they can keep themselves safe, because as adults in a trusted relationship, there is nothing wrong with sharing those images. People should have the tools to do that securely, because nobody deserves to have their trust violated in that way. So we need more platforms and more awareness that these tools are available. So we're very keen to keep talking about it, because it's available to everybody in the world 24 hours a day. If you're over 18, you can go to stopncii.org and take back some power.
Thank you so much. Atinuke, take a minute to talk about any other agencies or institutions that we can reach out to raise awareness.
So I think that we can reach out to other organizations that have tech-related apps online. I actually curated like a list which I can put in the chat room just because of time. But before we go, I also wanted, I'm looking at the time, and I wanted to say something. Really, I feel like one of the things that we all need to, which we're already doing, but to intentionally do more, is to keep educating, keep empowering, and keep supporting. So prevention talks about the before, but what of the after? A lot of, I bother a bit about the youths in the thoughtlessness of an action that can trigger too many things concerning their lives. What do they do? Who do they go to? Who do they speak with? I feel like in Africa also is to then engage with us that are parents to also begin to try and detach a bit from these things and not hang in on the stigma and the shame that also comes with if such a thing comes around your youth, but to begin to see how to support those youths and to help them to be able to, get the kind of supports that they have. I'm putting right into that chat box now some of the information that I curated in terms of who to speak with and where we can go to when this kind of things come up. Yeah.
That's very useful for us. Thank you so much. Before I hand back to Pamela, I just want to thank everybody for this very enriching session. I think it's a start of many dialogues and conversations. And I think what is very clear that there are 4 of us from different parts of the world, and there are so many commonalities and so much work to be done. And I think collaboration and learning from each other, sharing best practices is the best way forward. So with that, thank you again to the No More team for bringing us together. And Pamela, over to you.
Thank you, Rita, so much for being such a fantastic moderator and playing here. And thank you to Sophie, Atinukia, and Tarisai for being here with us. We carry on with kind of more sessions. I know there's one that's just, starting. So yes, please do enjoy your day and stay with us. Thank you very much.